Ravens Watch.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of The Ravens Watch. I am your host, David Lee Corbo, aka The Raven, and today's guest is Vicki Joy Anderson. Vicki is here today to talk about sleep paralysis and not specifically, but also including the Hat Man, a phenomenon that we discussed in a couple of episodes ago, if you'll remember. And Vicki is an author, and I actually discovered her through her guest appearances on Blurry Creatures, which is one of my favorite personal podcasts, and Kill the Mockingbirds, another one of my favorite podcasts. So I'm a little bit familiar with your work, Vicki, but if you could, for the audience, can you tell them first off where to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me at my website, VickiJoyAnderson.com. That's Vicki with an I, Anderson, S-O-N. And there's links that will get you pretty much anywhere you need to go from there. But if you want my most recent book, They Only Come Out at Night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis, that is available exclusively on lamarzulli.net.
Oh, LA. Okay, great. I'm familiar with LA Marzulli, and I love the name of the book, by the way. Very cool.
Yeah, I love that. It's named after an old Edgar Winter album from, I think, 1972 or something around there, but it was perfect and you can't copyright a title, so we took it.
There you go. Vicki, can we start by, and I'm sure it's a loaded question, but how is it that you got into this interest, this realm of the paranormal? I mean, everybody has sort of a story that more or less sent them down the road that they're on, and I'd be very interested in hearing yours.
Yeah, absolutely. It was by accident. It was by providence. I had sleep paralysis my entire life. From the time I was probably 2, 3 years old, my first strong memories of it are around 4. I would have it frequently, night after night, for a week or two in a row. It would go away, it would come back. Kind of plagued me for over 40 years of my life. It just kept coming back. And I've definitely heard people that have had worse experiences than me by way of terror. I didn't have a lot of these, dynamic stories. It was pretty much for me just the super exacerbated nightmare versions, where you'd wake up and you couldn't move and you knew something was in the room and had all of the ominous feelings of your soul being taken and dragged to hell kind of stuff. But it happened night after night, and it's a kind of thing where, as funny as it sounds, and I'm not alone in this because I've talked to hundreds of people who have had this, a lot of the people that have sleep paralysis from childhood all the way through their life, some of the other things that we have in common is there was something in childhood that was sort of traumatic that opened the door for that. In my case, it was a whole bunch of surgeries from the day I was born all the way up into my teen years. And that just creates a lot of anxiety and fear and confusion and bullying and what Robert Monroe would call the loosh, that this energy, this negative energy that draws these entities to you almost like a pheromone. And so unfortunately for the human beings involved, but I guess fortunately for those who have the nefarious intentions, when you're dealing with someone who is accustomed to trauma, who are sort of living every day in some sort of a foxhole sort of survival mode, you get to the point where the craziest, most awful things can be happening to you, and you're like, it's another day, because it's just another day. And so a lot of us don't really go out of our way to necessarily fight against it or anything. It becomes almost inconsequential. And so it was never the kind of thing that I gave too much thought to. I didn't think about it. I really wasn't doing anything to get rid of it or to try to see if other people were experiencing it. And by the way, I did not think anyone else was experiencing this. And it's not the kind of thing you talk about anyway, because you're crazy or you're schizophrenic or you're mentally ill or you get put on, psychotropic medication. And life was pretty good other than that. So I didn't want to alter the equation any. So it wasn't until I found out that sleep paralysis was a thing. I had no idea it had a name, and I had no idea anyone else suffered from it. So once that got on my radar in my 30s, I became just a voracious reader of anything I could get my hands on. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you know in your research, and especially with trying to find information on the shadow people and the Hat Man and this experience in and of itself, there's just a lot of gaslighting out there. A lot of the information you do find is sort of poo-pooing it. It's a figment of your imagination. It's just stress. You have a mental illness. It's a narcolepsy thing, and so it's been really hard to find anyone that takes the more spiritual aspects of it seriously. And that's what I tried to do in my book is I'm not I am not putting science and medicine aside. Uh, and I think that's where a lot of people have problems and why we're having trouble coming to an intellectually honest discussion of this topic is the scientists want to say it's this and only this. And the physicians want to say it's this and only this. And the pastors and the priests and the religious people want to say it's this and only this. And what I'm saying is this is a multi-tentacled beast that we're dealing with. There are physiological aspects. There are psychological aspects. There are scientific aspects. There are spiritual aspects. And until we're willing to look at this like a three-dimensional diamond with multiple facets instead of a one-dimensional picture in a frame, we're never going to get to the bottom of it. And now with social media, it's getting, I think, exacerbated even more because now it's just turning into a meme. Now it's a joke. Now everyone, oh, my sleep paralysis monster, and massive blow up of the Shadow Man on TikTok since last year with all of the Benadryl memes and all that stuff. And so it's just a joke. Now it's just a joke. It's your little astral buddy who freaks you out. And I find that young people especially, it's kind of like the thrill and the exhilaration of a roller coaster. You know, we like to have the crap scared out of us as human beings. It's why we watch horror movies. It's why we bungee jump. It's why we go on amusement park rides. And for some reason, and I would argue that it's because bad information is out there, because we're being told by the scientists and the physicians and the New Agers that there's nothing wrong with it. It's totally normal. It's just a firing of your brain at night.
Young psychological phenomenon.
Totally. So unfortunately, what's happening is because people have a false sense of safety, they're like, yeah, I'm in a roller coaster, but I'm buckled in. So I can go and I can flirt with this and I can hang out with my shadow man and I can talk to my spirit guide and I'm going to have great stories for the campfire. And they don't understand that you are in the roller coaster, but you are not buckled in. And I think that is a big problem with how social media is taking. The approach that social media is taking is very dangerous because they're making it into a meme. And this is actually a very, very serious spiritual phenomenon.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you've said there. I think there is this sort of reductive viewpoint of sleep paralysis to chalking it up to just a purely psychological phenomenon. And for a while, I entertained that camp because I can see the psychological side of things. Like you alluded to before, these things, they seem to come in when you're at your most vulnerable. So depression, anxiety, anger, things of this nature, like you said before, the expression of loosh being an energy that these entities draw off of. And so if I may tell a quick story and see if any of the elements of this story jump out to you in any meaningful way. I've told this one before, but I'll tell it again, and I'll kind of make it the abridged version. But when I was younger, I had a sort of step grandmother, and she was a wonderful woman, but for some reason didn't have any reservations about telling me her experiences. Now, this was 1997, 1998, so I would have been about 7 or 8 years old. And she would tell me this harrowing story of waking up in the middle of the night, being unable to move, struck with an unbelievable sense of terror, and being aware of a presence in her room. Now, the presence that was in her room was this man in a sort of duster coat with a brimmed hat, very much the silhouette of like Zorro, right? Or even I likened it to the image that you might see on those neighborhood watch signs, you know, where it's kind of the glowing eyes and the silhouette of a man. And she would tell me these stories, and one of them in particular was this story where in one night, both her and her sister saw it. And the following morning, they're having a discussion in hushed tones at the breakfast table about it. And the mother overhears. And instead of dismissing it, she actually confirms she saw it in the same night in a separate room. So this is before the internet. And my understanding of it is immediately as an entity, because even as a child, I was able to think, well, how could other people see it if it's not real? How could several people in one night see it if it's not real? So fast forward to about 2016, 2017, and I'm told a story about my biological grandmother. She passed away when I was 6 years old, and she had a very difficult life. And a lot of sort of substance abuse when it came to alcohol. Everyone knows alcohol is a depressant. You're very vulnerable to darker thoughts, sadness and anger when you're drinking. And so she would have these experiences, although they stemmed from childhood, where she would wake up, she would be unable to move. There would be a bright white light in her window. And when she finally was able to scream for her mother to come, the light would zip away before anybody could see it. So I find out that my grandmother has this book that she read, and she thinks that it sort of connected some dots for her. And she asked my mother not to read it. I've heard about this from an aunt. I go to my mother, and my mother has, in fact, never read it, but is very quick to spill the beans. And she goes, "Oh, it's a book called Communion by Whitley Strieber." And so I don't know if you're familiar with Whitley Strieber or Communion, but it is a sort of diary of abduction experiences, sleep paralysis and abduction experiences that this person collects and puts into a book to say there's some compelling evidence here of commonalities between all these stories. So I begin to go down this, and I've not had any of these experiences by this point. I'm maybe 16, 17 years old, no experiences, but the internet is young. It's 2006. YouTube is really starting to become the thing that it is now. And so I take to the internet and I start to look for these elements of being paralyzed, entities in the room, feelings of terror. And of course, I find what you're all too familiar with, this body of evidence and this community of people who are all experiencing the same thing. So this is where my part comes in. What I start to feel like is I'm going to, just by virtue of looking into this, it's on my mind all the time. It very much felt personal. It felt like I was pulling at this thread that was incredibly compelling, and I had to keep going. But I also knew the brain is such that whatever's on your mind, sure, it can trickle into your dreams, and maybe even worse than that, the abyss that you stare into may one day look back. And so I start to go down this rabbit hole, and one night as I'm sleeping, I wake up and I'm paralyzed. Now, my brain is still, and I'm sure you can speak to this, in sleep paralysis, you are functioning very similar to how you're functioning now. It's not, for some people it may be, but for me, it was not a drowsy state. I was awake.
Right.
I was very awake. And so I'm looking around the room, only my eyes can move, and I'm kind of reasoning with myself and saying, okay, we kind of expected this. And before I knew it, suddenly the silhouette of a man is in the room with me. And I experienced something that now I associate with the term infrasound, which is this almost this tone that you can't hear, or human beings don't have the ability to detect, but it's a very low tone. And what it felt like was I was being almost electrocuted. No pain, but an intense vibration. My body locked up, my extremities locked out at the joints, and suddenly I was hit with an irrational amount of fear. I mean, you said it before, this, like, your soul is in jeopardy. And I experienced this for only a few moments. I black out, and then I come to, and my head is now, at the time I was with my girlfriend, and her feet are by my head now. Instead of my head being next to hers on the pillow, I'm now in a different position. And I look towards the closet where there is no light bulb, but there is still this inexplicably bright white light pouring out of the closet. And then boom, the infrasound hits again. There's vibration, this sound, this intense buzzing sound. my body locks up, I pass out, and I wake up in the morning, and it just kind of is what it is. Um, so, and I'm sure I see you shaking your head. There's certain elements that are um, key characteristics of the experience. I would say the infrasound, this electrocution feeling, obviously the paralysis, like you said, this doom, soul jeopardy fear, um, this bright white light, and this presence of an entity. And I think before I pass the ball back to you, I would also like to say that even though they chalk this up as a um, purely psychological phenomenon, there are certain aspects that I can't fit a puzzle piece correctly in with the rest of the puzzle. And one of those aspects is that this man in particular, the Hat Man, he is, you could say, when you're in a dream state, you wake up, you're paralyzed, and that's an alarming state to be in. And so since you're partially in a dream state already, even though I never felt like I was in that instance, your mind begins to project images in the dark. And so you may start to hallucinate because you're already afraid that this dark shadow in the corner of your room, which is just a poorly lit area, is actually some greasy demon from hell. But the Hat Man is not necessarily, one, the scariest thing I can think of. I surely can conjure more terrifying images than a man dressed like Zorro. That was a movie I was pretty fond of, actually. And two, this is not unique to the United States. And I only have anecdotal evidence for this, but the evidence that I'll cite is a game called LSD Dreamscape or something of that nature. It's actually in the image that I sent you. And it was a video game made in about 1996 for PlayStation 1, where a Japanese video game creator decided that video games didn't have to be what we thought of them as, and they could be more of an artistic experience. And so within that game, there is the Hat Man in this weird, it's a very surreal experience. I watched some videos on it, never played it myself, but all of these came from his personal dreams. And yet a Japanese content creator on the other side of the planet has within his, dreamscape video game, the Hat Man, this man in a duster coat with the wide brim hat. So coupling that with the idea that several people can see it in the same night, this is not purely psychological phenomenon, in my opinion. I'm not, incredibly educated on it, but it seems to be common sense to me. And it very much seems to be something that psychologists and people in medical professions, they can't quantify it. And so they'd rather dismiss it outright as just a dream. Do you have any thoughts on any of the elements of what I've said?
Yeah, absolutely. I like your concept of infrasound. One of the reasons why it took me so long to get through some hurdles with my own sleep paralysis research is I couldn't find anyone else at that early stage where, at the infancy of the internet, where it was message boards. That's where I had to get my first initial bit of information. I would be searching for like sleep paralysis sound effects. And I was in the realm of the dictionary where I was trying to explain this sound I heard. And so I would be, this was predated Google, but I would be internet searching like helicopter sound, because it was like it was, and it took me forever to find. It took me years before I found other people that would talk about the sounds. And it would always be a precursor. Once you heard the sound, you knew what was coming and you had a split second. And the reason I failed to get any further in my research is because I had the wrong idea. What I was hearing wasn't a sound, it was a vibration. It was a vibrational thing. It was a frequency thing. And so once I had that vocabulary word in tow and started doing searches that had to do with vibrations, that's when I got into the whole field of study that sleep paralysis is a precursor to out-of-body and or astral projection. Now, where my research has taken me, and I think a lot of people are going to relate to this, I could have gotten really far in my research 10 years ago, but I came across some things that scared me, and I thought, I don't I don't want to know if this is really what it was. I always knew it was more than a dream, but I didn't want to know. You know what I mean? Like, if I go exploring in a cave and I have a great experience and I come out, I don't want to hear that when I was in there was 5,000 tarantulas and that was the thing I was feeling on my back. I don't want to know, you know. But what I started discovering was that the sleep paralysis experience is absolutely, in the same sense of the word, an abduction scenario as are the alien experiencers, right? And I didn't really want this to be true because I wanted to believe that, as scary as it was, I was safely tucked into my bed, seeing all of this in my bedroom. I didn't want to face the fact that that sleep paralysis experience where we wake up in our room and we can't move and we see the shadow man, that is probably the tail end of a much greater experience that we no longer remember. Much like the UFO experiencers, they don't remember what happened. The reason they know something happened is they see a bright light and there's missing time. So the brilliance of how nefarious the sleep paralysis version of this abduction is that we wake up and we're never going to question the missing time. Because when we sleep, it's 4 to 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, 3 hours, however long you're asleep, you're never going to question that there's missing time. And my theory is that when we wake up, we have no memory of what just happened, but our body is physiologically showing every single sign of a fight or flight adrenaline rush. We've got the pounding heart, we've got the fear, we've got the self-protective measures, we've got the saliva all completely dried up in our mouth. We're in positions where our hands are in defensive postures. Our body is doing everything to tell us that it just endured something very traumatic. But it's so brilliant the way they have set up these smoke and mirrors that you wake up and it was just a bad dream. Even the bedroom scenario, when we wake up and we see our bedroom, and I have a really hard time explaining this to people because it goes against the narrative, and I'm not casting this in stone, but this is something I want more sleep paralysis experiencers to consider and to observe as they're going through this. Just bear in mind that I've gone through this hundreds and hundreds of times. And when you're lucid, you have the opportunity to test theories and observe things. And so in the 47 years that this was reoccurring to me on a frequent basis, I was able to test some things out. One of the things that I noticed was that whenever my eyes opened and I could see my room, whether I was in my bedroom or at a friend's house or in a hotel room or wherever I was sleeping, there was always a glitch. There's always one thing in the room that is not right. You don't notice it at the time because you're terrified and your goal is just to wake up and to get out of there. But if you have the ability to observe and think about it later, there's always going to be one thing wrong. The door is going to be on the wrong wall. There's going to be a window that's not really in your room. There's going to be a bedspread that's a different color. You're going to have a headboard that you don't really have in real life. One time when I was in this, there were 3 floor-length mirrors hanging on the wall, which aren't in my room. There was things on the bookshelf that aren't really there. One time my living room looked exactly like my living room. Same fabric, same everything that on the couch that I was on. The difference is that I was sleeping balled up on an oversized chair instead of a huge sectional couch, which was what was really there in real life. And so this was very perplexing to me. And I decided I want to figure out why there's a glitch. So I started sleeping every night with a sleep mask on to see if my eyes are all covered up, will I see nothing? Or will I still see my room? Because if I still see my room, then I'm going to know this is some sort of overlay. So a couple times with the sleep mask on, I had sleep paralysis and I didn't see my room and I didn't see the surroundings. I saw something completely and utterly hallucinatory. I saw something acid trippy. Both times it was like an acid trip. It was nonsensical. It wasn't scary, but it was acid trippy, you know, like the classic 60s movies you see. It was like watching like Pink Floyd The Wall or a Peter Gabriel video. It was just all this nonsense, this kaleidoscope of nonsense. And it was still scary though, because I realized in that moment where I couldn't move and I couldn't wake up that this magic, this technology, whatever this is, because I don't know who's behind this. I don't know if it's military. I don't know if it's demonic. I don't know if it's both. I don't know. Whoever is at that control board has the ability to hijack our visual cortex. They can make us see whatever they want us to see. And it behooves them to make us think we're seeing our bedroom, so that's where we think we are. We're safe. Maybe we're not safe. Maybe we're not there at all. Maybe like the UFO abductees, we're on a table somewhere, or we're in some aspect or dark corner of the astral realm. Maybe we're getting groomed somewhere by something. And when we wake up, we don't remember it. Now, I'm an English major. I'm a writer. I'm a word nerd. I love English. I love grammar. I love all that stuff. And it dawned on me one day that astral projection is actually a brilliant play on words. It means two things. The description that we've been told, what we're told, astral projection is when you are projecting, your spirit is projecting out of your body like a projectile, like a missile. Part of you is coming out and it's projecting up into the astral. That's what astral projection is. That's the official definition. But it could also mean that some entity in the astral realm is projecting images into your visual cortex. He's hijacking your visual cortex, your pineal gland, and is using it like a film projector and projecting things before your eyes that may not be really what you're seeing or where you are. And so when we wake up, everybody talks about the shadow people and the old hag and, you know, the incubus and the succubus. Like, everyone's very intrigued with all of that. That's the aspect of the multifaceted diamond that everybody focuses on, to the detriment of not understanding the full experience, which I think is a pulling one up into the astral realm. I talk about this in my book, chapter 4. It's on astral vampires and threshold covenants. And this ties into something that you were saying earlier, that when we are in this astral state, why are we there? Why are we being targeted? Why were we chosen for this? This is where a lot of people get led down the primrose path. This is the proverbial fairy tale breadcrumb trail into the woods where grandma's dressed like a wolf and wants to eat you. This is where a lot of people get steered wrong. They believe what they're told by these entities. You're special. You're chosen. You have a gift. And now all of a sudden I have a purpose and I'm here to save the planet. And hey, if you got a dull, monotonous life or a difficult life or a crappy job or a crappy marriage, or hey, who doesn't want to be told by light beings that they need your help to save the planet? So this is where a lot of people go wrong, because that's the explanation as to why you were chosen, why you were targeted. But what's interesting is every entity or being in the spirit realm, and I use the word spirit realm here very loosely, as opposed to on planet Earth, we're terrestrial. We're in the terrestrial realm. The spirit realm could be anything good or bad, dimensionally not terrestrial. That's all I'm talking about right now. We know from our vampire lore that a vampire cannot attack you until you've given it invitation and it crosses the threshold of your home. That's the rule. So if you're savvy and this thing comes to you slam the door on its face, it's not getting in. needs that invitation. This is not just the rule of the ghoul. We see this even in scripture. Jesus Christ, okay, he should be able to do whatever he wants, right? He doesn't have to follow rules. He made the rules. He doesn't have to do anything. But in Revelation 3:20, it says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens, then I'll come in and eat with him and blah, blah, blah. Where that's what it, you pray to receive
Vicki,
Jesus. Oh, yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you mind pulling that back just like 3 seconds? You kind of dropped out there for a moment. You were saying that if you knock at the door, for some reason, it's entirely cut out. If the audience can hear me, it's a very strange part to cut out at, because from where I'm sitting, we've gotten to the part of the story that is integral to sort of keeping these things at bay.
Yep.
And just as Vicki goes here to elaborate, all of a sudden, for the first time in my experience doing my show, we've lost quite a bit of sound, but I can see that Vicki hears me. Can you do a sound check for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Test 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine now. So let's rewind it and go back to this. From the Bible, Jesus says something about a door.
Yep, I will. I love that just happened, and I'll tell you why. We started this show by saying, you can't just say this is scientific. You can't just say this is narcolepsy. You can't just say this is medical. There's something spiritual. And you know what? Every single podcast, whether I'm on a Christian show, a New Age show, a secular show, a paranormal show, every single time I bring up Revelation 3:20 and I explain what's being bastardized, when I explain who these shadow people are imitating, every time I try to show you this is the biblical, spiritual, demonic aspect to this, the tech goes down. So just a coincidence, but I tell you, I've been on over 100 shows, and every time I bring this on, the Skype goes out, that something happens. So just take that with a grain of salt, skeptics. But the fact of the matter is, this is always a very hard thing for me to get out without a little bit of interference. And you know what? It doesn't. I love it when it's interference because it just proves my point. But with that said, the rule for the ghoul is I cannot touch you unless you invite me into your home. Okay. And we also know that the rule for the ghoul is that the only way to undo a covenant with a vampire is you either die, all contracts are broken upon death, right? Till death do we part. Marriage is a covenant. All of our covenants, all of our contracts, when you die, all of your contracts and covenants are null and void. The reason that's a rule here on earth is because it was a rule in heaven. It's a rule in the spirit realm. So the only way you can get out of a contract with a vampire, a spiritual entity, a demon, whatever you want to call it, is you have to either die, or the ownership of the home has to change hands, because you need the invitation then from the new person who holds the deed. So back to Revelation 3:20, if I can get this out.
Let's try it again.
This isn't just for ghouls and vampires. Jesus Christ, who's not subject to any law, also says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door and lets me in, then I will come in and eat with him and he with me. And that whole eating part is kind of weird. When you break bread with someone, that's actually a salt covenant, because the bread is the carrier of salt. This has kind of fallen out of culture in the early to mid 1800s, but all the way up to the mid 1800s, people did salt covenants, and it was in lieu of the blood covenants because they were gory and messy. And it got to a point in the 1800s where people didn't want to slaughter animals at the front door anymore and put bloody handprints to flesh, right? And so salt, which is as integral to life as blood, became a stand-in for the civilized world, the modern world. Their blood covenants were salt covenants. So when Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock, if anyone hears my voice, takes the trouble to answer the door, opens it up and says, you may come in, that I will eat with you and you with me means I'm going to break bread, which is a salt covenant, which means I will die to protect you. That was what these threshold and these hospitality covenants in the old days were. You'd slaughter this animal at the door, and your guest who came over the threshold was then under your protection. They were like a blood-bought, adopted member of the family. And we see aspects of this in scripture where Lot protected his guests who came that night and knocked and said, hey, bring your guests out so we can have sex with them. And he's like, no. Now, granted, it was really weird that he offered his virgin daughters, but I think the reason he offered the virgin daughters is because these people were not interested in that. The people that Lot was housing were angelic beings. So this wasn't simply, the context of this wasn't simply homosexuality. This goes all the way back to the antediluvian days where the Watchers mingled with the women and had these demigods. And the same thing was still being perpetuated in Sodom and Gomorrah at the time of Lot. So Lot knew they don't want a human being. They don't want a daughter. They want these angelic beings that's in my house. But the fact is, Lot protected those men with his life because he had invited them over the threshold and broken bread with them. In the old days, if you broke a salt covenant, you were put to death. It was serious. So what we have here, and this goes all the way back to what you were saying about, did I invite these things in because of my curiosity? What was I doing all this research? And interestingly, especially in the church, invitation is, I went out and I found a drug dealer and I did a transaction and I gave them money. Invitation is this, I went out with this in mind and procured everything I needed to do in order to make this transaction. But the fact is, invitation can be something as simple as not taking a thought captive. It can be a out of control thought life. When Jesus says, if you even think about this, it's as good as doing it. There's this no separation between the mind and the action, because the mind is the wellspring of the heart and its desires. And so invitation to these things can be a morbid curiosity. It can be a fantasy life. This is why I think that all of this virtual reality and role playing and augmented reality, and that's where this is dangerous. If you are vicariously doing things in your mind and acting them out in your mind all day long, that is the wellspring of your heart and your desires. And if the spirit realm knows this is what's in this person's heart, it goes back to the old, if we build it, they will come. If you're sitting there online, studying these things and, all this stuff, it can be a form of invitation. Now, everyone who does this isn't going to have this experience. I think that there are a set of things that these entities are looking for. There's a certain personality type that they're looking for this astral projection stuff. It's a grooming. And so they're looking, there's an MO for who they're looking for. And so it's not just people who sit and read comic books all day are going to get, sucked into this. But it is a form of invitation. And the reason I wrote my book the way that I did, at the end of every chapter, I have a whole page of warfare points and a cleansing prayer. And I warn people, don't even go to the next chapter. If the only reason you're reading this is because it's titillating, then it's not the right reason to be studying this. You research this if you are trying to get rid of it, if it's tormenting you, or if someone you know or love is being tormented, if you're a counselor, if you're a pastor, you study this kind of stuff for the means to the end is that the deeds of the devil will be exposed and that captives will be set free. If it's purely entertainment, you are running the risk. Because if you put a neon sign in your bedroom every night, if they build it, they will come. If you're saying, man, I would really like to know, that'd be cool. I'd like to know what that's like. Eventually, you probably will know what it's like. The same way if you go into a graveyard and start asking people to talk to you, they're probably going to, because you're asking for it. It's the invitation. It's the proverbial vampire invite.
This brings to mind a very a story that I'd like to share with you. The audience has heard the first one, so I'll give you the abridged version of that. There's two of them, actually, though. The first one is that I had moved out to Las Vegas from New Jersey, and after some time, my wife, my son, and we all moved back to New Jersey. We moved back because we had an illness in the family back in New Jersey, but ultimately, it felt like a type of failure. We set out to cut it out, and it didn't really pan out that way. In hindsight, I'm happy to be where I am, but at the time, I couldn't help but struggle with these feelings of, failing. And so I kind of began to skirt my responsibilities as a husband and as a father because we landed with the in-laws, and I didn't feel like king of the castle, and I didn't feel like I had my role to play. And so instead of stepping up and finding my way, I became reclusive. I played a lot of video games. I would go to work. I'd come back, sit in my room, play video games, and then rinse and repeat. And I struggle sometimes to identify whether or not I'm depressed or anything like that, because when I was a kid, I was homeless for a good number of years. And so I began to develop this skill set where, it's good in some cases, bad in others, but I wouldn't feel so much. So I have a hard time identifying the state of mind that I'm in if it's a negative one. So I have a series of nights that are terrifying. And the first night, something is tugging at my arm and tugging at my leg, keeps waking me up out of sleep. But I kind of rationalize it in the sense that I'm sorry, this is the second night. I rationalize it in the sense that I'm just jerking in my sleep. But I'm also getting this feeling of like, it kind of feels like something's pulling me, but I'm pushing that down. The night before that, I'm dealing with something that, once again is psychologically dismissed as exploding head syndrome. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
So I keep hearing a loud banging noise, like someone's banging on the door, but it's like 3 a.m. and nobody's banging on the door. And there's, of course, that time. And so, this happens about 3 times in a row. And each time that it does, I'm more and more dealing with the idea that it's not knocking on a door, but that it's knocking on me. And that's an unsettling thought. The third night, I have this dream where stood in the middle of a dark room with black swirling mist around its legs is this thing that is rage incarnate. Its skin is black and gray, sort of leopard print, and its eyes are like maraschino cherries, bright red. And it's heaving its chest, with these deep rage-filled breaths, and it's also got tusks, bottom canines that overlap its upper lip. And all I remember is looking at it, and it was terrifying. And I wake up in the morning, and my wife shares with me that she experienced sleep paralysis that night, which she's not, that's not something that she has a disposition to experience. And so she starts telling me that she looked over to me in the middle of the night, couldn't move, but saw this sort of monster with bright red eyes pinning me down in the bed the same night that I have this. And I don't tell her what I experienced because it doesn't seem like it's going to do me any good. And it's certainly not going to make her feel better. And right now in that bedroom, this one room that we're all huddled in, it's me, her, and my son on another air mattress. And there's just no good reason to share that at the moment. And then fast forward to the fourth night. I wake up in the morning, seemingly nothing happened, but my wife has taken a video of my jugular, where you would put your fingers to check a pulse, is going nuts, indicating that I'm having some sort of a dream. So she takes a quick video and then she wakes me up and then she shows me the video. And as we're discussing that, my son pops out of bed crying because he saw this monster with bright red eyes in a nightmare. So I am now reaching desperation. I was not raised Christian or Catholic. I was raised in a household that religion was a secondary thought. And I've never actually had any bad feelings towards Christianity or God or anything. In fact, I always suspected that it was real and that, in time I would come to have a relationship, but never really pursued anything. But the night of the fifth night, I was desperate because it's crossed over into my son experiencing it, my wife experiencing it, and I've got no course of action whatsoever. So that night I pray to Jesus Christ before I go to sleep, and the entire experience stops and never happens again. Now, fast forward a few years later, I closed on my first home. I moved to Florida, and I've got a puppy. And I'm walking this dog, and as I'm walking the dog, some neighbors come by, and it's this nice moment. They've got a stroller, they've got young kids and older kids, and they see the puppy. I say, "Hey, folks, how you doing?" And just before those people came around, the neighbors whose house I was near, they were screaming at each other. It was echoing through the streets, and I didn't want them to see that I was there. I didn't want them to know that I had heard, but they were being brutal with each other. And of course, the puppy locks into position and doesn't want to move. So now I'm stood across the street from these people, and they leave. You can hear the argument. He's mad at the wife that she forgot something somewhere. Now they have to go and retrace their steps. But the way they retrace their steps, they leave the house, the garage door is wide open, the light's on, and they pull away in a huff. And now here comes his family. I wave, and in my peripheral vision, I see somebody walk out of this garage with the light on, and they're beelining for me. You know, when someone's walking directly towards you, they got a pace, they're moving quickly, they are taking the shortest path possible to you. And I am feeling mortified. I think that this person is going to come to me and apologize for having heard what I heard. And I didn't rationalize the fact that those people had actually just left. I just said, I guess not. I guess one of them stayed behind. So this person is speed walking towards me, and I'm so, feeling like I don't want to have this confrontation that I'm prepared to tell them, I didn't hear anything. Really? Oh, hey, we're all normal. Everybody argues. No big deal. So I start to position myself, because this is how much leeway I want to give them. I want them to act like I don't even see them approaching. I don't know why that's going to soften the blow. So I start to turn my back to them, and they should be upon me in like a 3 count. And they're not saying anything. And I go, fine, I'll initiate. And I turn around, and no one is there. And I go, wow, that's really strange, but I must have been wrong. So I go back home, and I tell the story to my wife and my niece, and they bring to my attention, like, hey, that's actually really creepy. And I go, you know what? I guess it is. That night, and for about 2 weeks, something was knocking on all of my windows, on my front door, and on my garage door. And this is what I do. This is the realm that I'm interested in. So even the first night, I had this feeling that something tried me. Something saw me and is trying me. And you could use your imagination as to what I mean by trying, but something was testing me specifically. And I was the new owner of the home. And so it got to the point where I would be talking to my cousin. We would be within arm's reach from the front door. Someone would knock on it, and we would fling the door open so quickly there's no way anyone would get away from us. And there was even a moment where we opened the door, we went out, he went left, I went right, or actually vice versa. And I saw something, and it didn't make sense, so I ignored it, and I only told him later what I saw. But like a small black cloud scurrying across my front lawn in my peripheral vision. But it wasn't a person, and it wasn't an animal, so I paid it no mind. It was just, this image of something black scurrying. And so to put a cap on the story, there was a series of nights where I never prayed out loud. I think that I would fumble if I tried to pray out loud, but I did pray very aggressively in the name of Jesus Christ, and with the intent that I had authority over this that was given to me by Jesus Christ, and as the homeowner, that this is my home and this is my family, and that this thing had to leave in the name of Jesus Christ and go where Jesus wills it to be, but to leave my house and to leave my family. And there was, albeit I'm thinking this, anger and intent in those thoughts. insisting that you leave in the name of Christ. And since then, it's been pretty good. Although it does seem that these things never fully go away, but like it can't come in. And to speak on what you said before about this whole inviting a thing in, I do believe that communicating, if I'm going to communicate with it, it's to tell it to leave. I am not interested in what you are or what you want. I could give a damn less what you want. You are leaving now. This is my home and I am the owner. But people have this thing where they think it's cute. I mean, obviously the Ouija board, right? They want to talk to it. What can you tell me? Who are you? What's your name? As if the thing is not going to lie. But I mean, so people want to separate the paranormal from God and in particular Jesus Christ, because there's this idea that somehow Christianity or Catholicism is just distasteful or something to be laughed at. But at the same time, you're entertaining this. Like, I love people that walk around with pentagrams on their shirts and, you know, they do their witchcraft and they do and I'm like, either you're LARPing, right? Either you're having a big laugh and this is a joke, or you believe in it. And either one is like, if it's a joke, why even bother? And if you believe in it, is there not another side of the coin that's good and light? And how do you square these two things? But people wear the supernatural, they wear witchcraft and Satanism and things like that as a costume, something that's fun. And I believe it's more real than they believe it's real.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we call those the posers. So Tom Dunn and I, we do a show. We're on hiatus now, but we do Through the Black, and we expose occult crime, and we work with satanic ritual abuse survivors and things like that. And so we travel in these circles quite a bit. But anyway, we just say anyone who's got the black nail polish and the dyed hair and all the heavy metal t-shirts, if they're out advertising it, they're not the real deal. Because like the real people with the real power, the real occult people, the generational Satanists, you would never know who they were. They would never advertise it. And people think that this is hyperbole when I say it. The real bad guys are the ones teaching your kids Sunday school. And I'm not joking. That's where they hide. They hide in the churches. They're the elders. And they're on the elder board. And they're the ones running the prayer teams. And I'm no joke. So yeah, the posers that kind of run around in their pentagrams and stuff, you know, even like some of the celebrities and the Jay-Z's out there, it's like, you are just a big doofus pawn, you know. It just whatever little task they need you for, once you have accomplished your purpose for them, you will be nothing in their sight, you know. And this is kind of why I have such a heart too for the people who are getting sucked into the new age and who are up, you know, astral projecting and communicating with the Council of Eight and the Council of Nine and all these things. This is what I tell people. You know, some people, they delve into this stuff and their very first experience is terrible and scary, and it's revealed to them immediately, this is bad and I need to get out of here. Other people can delve into this stuff for 10 years and think it's wonderful. Now, there's two things going on there. Even the people that are front-facing marketing pawns for the new age, they're out there teaching all the courses and they've got the 1 million subscribers and, you know, all that stuff. They're not telling you the whole story. They're not telling you about the insomnia. They're not telling you about the succubus rapes. They're not telling you about the medications that they're on to deal with the paranoia and the fear. They're not telling you about the sleep paralysis. They're not telling you about that. But the reason why some people hold on so much longer is because if the spirit realm has a purpose for you, if you are useful to them, if you have a gifting, if you have the charisma, if you have the, if you are a influencer and people listen to you, if you can sell books, if you can sell the doctrine, it's usually very theosophical. If you can be a spokesperson for this theosophical astral realm, new golden age religion, and you serve a purpose, they will keep you on board. You'll be on the payroll as long as you're useful to them. And so when people say to me, like, well, I have a friend who's been in it for 10 years and this has never happened, that's never happened. And so then they have a use for that person. That person has the skill set that they need and is performing the function that they need. But as soon as that person is no longer useful, they will see the other side of the coin as well. Because these things can parade around as beings of light. They can shapeshift to a degree. They can look like grandma. They can look like they can be a familiar. They can look like someone you love and trust. They can look like someone beautiful. They can look like an angel. But many of the people, not so much the New Agers, but more of the people who have been raised in generational Satanist families, or people who are deeply involved in the real occult, not the Halloween, Motley Crue, Ozzy Osbourne stuff, right? The real occult, they'll tell you, UFO abductees will also say this, that they'll have some sort of a handler or a spirit guide, and it is a friend, and it can be a handsome man, it can be a beautiful woman, it can be a grandmother, it can be something. At the point that the initiation steps get worked through and you get groomed into deeper and deeper and deeper levels, there's usually a point where these people will be confronted by that handler or that spirit guide, and they will be told, do you want to see what I really look like? And at that point, they will reveal their real facade. And it is typically, you hear the reptilian looking things, the praying mantis kind of things. A lot of times it's the really up there kind of uglier things. And I think that this is also part of the grooming process and part of the trauma-based mind control that is necessary to groom people to those really high levels. That is where they determine whether or not this person is going to be useful, loyal, if they can handle it. At that point, are they going to disassociate? Are they going to say, get me off this thing, get me off this thing? And it's funny, pop culture always takes things that have deep, deep spiritual meaning, and then they turn it into a song or a television show so that people will never associate what it really means with it. When they are putting people, when they're putting people through these trauma-based mind control programs, whether it's military or whether it's occult or whether it's astral, they will get to a point where some people can't handle it and they snap and they lose their minds. And this is called, in the occult, Breaking Bad. But if you say that to someone, they'll be like, oh, that's a TV show. And then you're way off here talking about Netflix. And
that was one of my favorite shows.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Breaking Bad is the occult term or the military term that when you are putting someone through a trauma-based mind control program and they snap, they don't learn to disassociate and create the alters and move through the levels. But when they break bad, that's kind of when they don't just get released from the program. They're the ones that get labeled, the mentally insane or the mentally ill, and they're the ones that get hepped up on all the psychotropic medication and are never the same again. And they try to tell you what's happened to them, and everybody says you sound like a crazy person. They actually broke bad. Because they go into these situations and they have an MO. They're looking for a certain level of creativity and intelligence and resilience. And some people make it through the whole program and become good, obedient super soldiers, and some do not. And the ones that absolutely don't make it through, they broke bad. So I don't know how I got on all that. I'm probably wildly off topic now, but
I do. My family, there seems to be this history of it. And one of the things that you said that's interesting to me is going back to how these entities want you to believe that you're special. They almost give you a sort of chosen one complex.
Yes.
You're going to save the world. We have to save the world together, and you're going to be part of this grandiose plan to save the world. And in reality, not to take away people's specialness, right? Human beings are very special. We were created in the image of God, and we have a very special place next to God. But we're kind of being played as useful idiots. And that is, I think, such a clever angle, because that is a very hard hit to the ego. This idea that even though these unbelievable entities, and they're unbelievable in the strictest sense of society doesn't accept that they exist. And so if we did have a much better grasp on that as a society, as a culture, then we would see the deception. But first off, they're not even supposed to exist, yet here they are. And not only are they here, but I'm special, and I'm going to help save the world or accomplish some sort of mission. And in reality, no, you're a means to an end. And when I said that my family has sort of this thing, so like I explained to you, my grandmother experienced these things. My mother has experiences. She's much more grounded, but she still has the occasional thing that she can't explain. The sound of little footsteps running through the house and handles jiggling, and and both her and my stepfather have heard them at the same time. My aunt is diagnosed schizophrenic, but she said things to me that I can't dismiss her, because she's got those elements of a story that repeat themselves through other people's experiences. And for example, I wanted to get your thoughts on this one element in particular. She claims to have seen, the devil. What exactly that means, I don't know, but you could boil it down to she's seen something horrifying, and something intelligent, and something like a man, but not quite a man, and something that she feels is very powerful. Now, that something is associated with a smell, and that smell is of sulfur and something putrid. Now, when she told me that story, I was just a kid and didn't have the context for it. But since then, throughout my research, I've come across that very many times. And I've come across that with very many different entities. You get that sort of putrid, disgusting smell from Bigfoot encounters, which even those I don't think are to be laughed at and dismissed. There's something going on there, in my opinion. And then you get the same thing with demonic entities. Of course, the idea that the underworld, or this other realm where these darker entities reside, smells of sulfur and brimstone, right? So that, to me, my aunt has had experiences. I've heard a lot of stories, and I can't help but, based off of what you said, think that she's one of the ones that maybe got a little bit too far. I mean, I know that she was into Ouija boards, and I've heard an anecdotal story about, well, this is when things started to go awry. I've not heard it from many sources, but I heard it, and kind of flippantly, from an older member of the family. And you start to put all that together, and it paints this picture of, maybe certainly schizophrenia is very poorly understood.
Yes.
And once you start to hear their stories and draw correlations between their stories and other people's stories who aren't as disturbed to the magnitude that they are, but yet they're telling you a similar story, and there's elements like we described with the sleep paralysis elements, right? There are these repeating elements that you can draw a string to, like some, crazy conspiracy theorist with a pegboard where you're connecting all the red dots, and that's what's happening here. And so I think it's very hard for people to, and you said it before too, it's like their targets are people who are depressed, who are filled with anxiety, who are angry, disenfranchised in whatever which way. And all of a sudden, here is meaning, not just meaning, the highest meaning. You're chosen. And it's honestly, it's sad, and it's infuriating, the way that this game is played on the vulnerable. Yeah. And it's also difficult because I've always had this sort of feeling, and sometimes I connect dots. I go, well, this thing happened to me and that thing happened to me. Um, and so maybe I had some experiences, and maybe I've had more than I'm aware of, but I do know that I had this overwhelming sense of purpose as a child. It didn't even make sense. It was like I was something really important is about me. And I found my important thing. My important thing now is to be a husband and be a father and to tell these stories and to share these ideas with people and help them to to quantify what's happening to them. And I'm very satisfied with that. But I had some other calling when I was a kid. I
Mhm.
was gonna I was gonna save the world. Where the hell did I get that idea?
Well, that's what the media is. The media is grooming all the children that aren't getting pulled into the astral, right? They're getting everybody else. We're groomed from the time we're a kid. Every little cartoon we're watching, every Disney movie, every DC, every Marvel, everything is about these little, you're a little tiny titan and you've got these superpowers that you're just going to have to figure out someday. And this is another thing we see it in every superhero. There was some sort of traumatic event that prepared them for their calling. So Superman loses his whole planet and his parents and gets put to this other planet, is orphaned, right? That's traumatic. And, Spider-Man gets bit and, by this big medical injury. If you really examine the superhero movies and then contrast that with M. Night Shyamalan's movie Split, uh, though only those who are broken, who are torn, and there is value in our suffering. Now, this is an absolute bastardization of a biblical concept that there is purpose in our suffering. God can work all things together for good. So no matter what happens to us, he can turn that into something good. But the purpose of our suffering is to wake us up. It's to make us Christ-like. It's to humble us. It's to open our eyes to eternal things rather than the temporal. There is extreme value in suffering. This is not the same thing as being traumatized. Jesus doesn't traumatize us. He allows us to go through things that are common to man, in order to learn lessons out of them and become better people. So what the occult and the military and these other programs are doing is to make people feel special, and the torture that they're undergoing in order to be broken and reprogrammed is worn as a badge of honor, because only those who have been torn apart will be able to fulfill their calling. And then it's reinforced through all of these movies where you see the hero of the protagonist of the movie. What happens for the first 2/3 of every movie? They're bullied. The pig's blood is dumped on them. They're beat up at school. They lose the job. They crack up their car. The guy doesn't ask her to prom. Like she or he is the loser. And when they come into their power and into their calling, you're rejoicing with them as they destroy their enemies, which again is contrary to Bible, where we're supposed to love our enemies. And even if we did have some sort of unique power or ability, it wouldn't be to destroy other people. And so the whole entire marketing wing of this program, which is the media, is just grooming kids from childhood. You are special. You are special. What are they doing there? They're priming the pump so that if and when these kids are also the ones being targeted, by the UFO abductions, through the sleep paralysis, through the out-of-body experiences, through the New Age stuff, this is the moment I've been waiting my whole life for. I knew it. I can be Cinderella. I can be Superman. I knew it. I knew I was special. So when when these things come to them and say, hey, the reason why we're doing this to you is because we're making you into a superhero. And we got to test your metal. You have to be in the refiner's fire. It's the crucible that's going to make you Iron Man, right? And so it's it's diabolical and brilliant what they're
It
doing.
hurts.
I
It
know,
hurts.
I know, man.
Oh
It
my God.
the Hollywood is the flip side of going to church every Sunday and hearing a pastor preach a sermon out of the Bible. We're learning Bible stories and parables, and we're hearing the gospel preached every Sunday our whole life. Hollywood is doing the counter move. They're preaching their gospel. And every time you buy a movie ticket and you see these superheroes, you're hearing their gospel. The Watchers that came down because they wanted the scepter of the kingdom. They wanted to rule planet Earth. When we go to the movies, we're hearing their sermons. It's their gospel. It's their second coming.
Yeah, and these are very much things that I'm sure I'm not alone in the idea that I know that on a subversive level, I'm aware of that. I'd rather not rationalize it, because if I rationalize it, well, then I've got a lot to tango with. My, inner narrator is going to hold me accountable because I've said the thing out loud. I've defined it. I know very well what's happening. Thanks a lot. Uh,
My pleasure.
I want to ask you, and this is, I imagine, getting into theory, unless maybe you do have some information there, but this image that I sent you, I believe it was yesterday. I had just done a an episode on this idea of Saturn and these people that worship this black cube. And interestingly, what happens is my first episode, I tell this Hat Man story. And now all of a sudden I find this image that connects the two, this Hat Man with this idea of Saturn. And I've been unpacking this Saturn thing and unpacking this fallen angel thing and coming across these potentials where Zeus of the Greek pantheon may very well be Baal, one of the fallen who were cast out. And then, of course, in the Roman pantheon, he's Jupiter. And you can do this with several entities throughout mythological history, where it seems to be the same beings, just different names, different monikers for different groups of people. And the more I look, the more it seems that these beings were the same ones that were cast out of heaven and who are deceiving mankind. And they are incredible. They can do incredible things. And so, earlier civilizations sort of fell for the bait and worshiped them and held them as gods. But as I like to say, and it's not a terminology that I coined, but lowercase g. And all of a sudden, I'm in the middle of this. Saturn is Satan. It's also Kronos, and he goes by other names too, where Moloch might even fit the bill. You can sort of find similarities there. And then I come across this image of Saturnus, who is this depicted as a man with a brimmed hat, and people drawing this correlation between Saturnus and the Hat Man. And I got to admit, I've got it out for him. I want to know this specific entity. I don't want to commune with it, but I do want to define it. Mm-hmm. And because I can't help but feel like this one in particular is they're all negative entities. They all feed off of our suffering and our pain and our emotions, our negative emotions. But very much how some people say, well, aliens are demons and this is demons and that is demons. I don't think that that helps. I think that there are categories and subcategories, and different ones come for different purposes, and different ones might be attracted to different people. So I'm trying to define this one in particular. But my father sees it. Just so many people close to me see this thing. Do you think that that trail there, that idea of Saturnus and the Hat Man, or even the Hat Man as being this separate entity instead of maybe just a screen image, these beings hijacking our visual cortex, projecting various images into our mind? Is he just a backdrop, or is he his own thing that has lore attached to him?
Right, right. So I have not done tons of research exclusive to the Hat Man, just because I've only seen him twice in my life. And there is a lot of confusion on the Hat Man. Now, some people postulate that the Shadow Man is just the shadow of the Hat Man. Now, I personally don't believe that, because the Shadow Man, if he was a shadow, he would have that hat on. And the Shadow Man does not typically have that aspect. It's possible, but another thing that's very interesting about the Hat Man is a lot of people see him when they're awake. They're not necessarily in a sleep paralysis state. Sometimes they are. It definitely can happen, but incubuses and succubuses and shadow people and the old woman in the rocking chair and the thing with the red eyes, and a lot of times those are sleep paralysis related or altered state of consciousness related. So people will see that under anesthesia or during ayahuasca or when they're drunk or when they're high. And so typically if you're walking, from your bathroom to your kitchen, you're not going to see one of these things in your hallway. Whereas a lot of people will see the Hat Man in that scenario. So what's really interesting to me about the Hat Man is, even though he's kind of seen in shadow, people don't usually say that he has facial features or skin, or they don't see the hands, or he's wearing gloves. The only facial feature that's sometimes recognized is the red glowing eyes. Though I think that there are other entities with the red glowing eyes that aren't the Hat Man. So it's very perplexing to me that he seems to be clothed in period clothing, but it's not always the same. Some see him in a cape, some people see him in a trench coat, and some people see him in a very nice suit with a pocket watch, of all strange things. And that's the guy I saw. I could tell you the whole thing. I could tell you the color of the suit, how far apart the pinstripes were. He had the watch, the little pocket. It was like a brown derby hat, no face. And what's interesting about the Shadow Man is, or the Hat Man, sorry, I'm not saying it's not out there, because I certainly haven't read every story, but the Hat Man doesn't ever really seem to communicate audibly or telepathically. He just ominously kind of stands there, which is why I think so many people think he's a good guy. And this is where we get into, I'm always telling people, we cannot use our emotions or our feelings as a litmus test for whether something's good or bad, evil or friend, right? And the reason why is because we know that Satan can pose as an angel of light, but we also have examples in Scripture of angels or Jesus being seen in heavenly, spiritual, or glorified states, and people are terrified. They fall over as dead. They wet their pants. They faint. They lose their speech. They have to be touched by that angel or that being and given the strength to speak again. The most common thing out of an angel's mouth when someone in the Bible has seen it is "fear not" or "do not be afraid," because that's the instinct. Now, the caveat to this is, and this is where you really have to break it down, and you have to break it down after the fact, because most people aren't thinking rationally when they're afraid. If you experience terror, is it because you feel like your soul is in danger? Or are you feeling terror because as a fallen, sinful human being, you're in the presence of absolute purity and holiness? Because that's going to be terrifying too. I think it is really interesting. John, who was the disciple that Jesus loved, it doesn't mean he didn't love the other ones, but he had a special relationship with John. And so we know that Jesus was very fond of John. He's the one that was going to take care of Jesus's mother. Instead of one of Jesus's blood-born brothers, he put John in charge in place of the firstborn to watch for his mother after he died. So they had a very close friendship. John had the opportunity to see Jesus again one time after he died. On the island of Patmos, when he was writing the Revelation, he saw Jesus seated on the throne in his glorified state as a lamb that was slain. This is his best friend, right? There's no reason for John to be afraid. It's Jesus. But he saw him in his glorified state, and it says he fell as a dead man. Terror. And again, it probably wasn't terror that he was going to be ripped to shreds or his soul was going to be lost or he was going to burn in hell. It was a holy cow. This is a righteous, pure, holy being. And being in the presence made him aware of what he was really made of. And if you want to understand what I'm saying here, we have this experience too on a lesser level. We spend most of our lives chasing the things that we think are going to make us feel big, chosen, important, rich, famous, wealthy, powerful. We chase after this. Our whole life, we invest most of our time trying to be the biggest thing in the room. But what betrays this is usually the times in our life where we feel the greatest amounts of awe are when we're the smallest thing in the room. Like when we're in the redwood forest being dwarfed by a 300-foot tree and it takes our breath away. Or we're standing on the precipice of the Grand Canyon looking at miles and miles and miles of rocks and gullies, and we lose our capacity to breathe. It's so beautiful. We feel the most awe when we are the smallest thing in the room. That's what John was experiencing. So one of the ways that we test the spirits to see whether they're from God, because it says in John 4:1, test every spirit. So when we're in the astral or we're having a nightmare, we see a hat man in our room. The way that we test the spirit is, what is driving our fear? Death or an otherworldly understanding of who we are in comparison to the things in this world that are truly great. And so if all we do to determine whether or not the hat man is friendly or not is, he didn't scare me, he didn't say he was going to drag my soul to hell, he didn't touch me, he didn't grab me, he didn't rape me. And so because he didn't pose a physical threat to me, he must be a good guy. Well, we're going to be in a world of hurt if that's our litmus test. And so the hat man, I will tell you, I believe that he's nefarious. I don't believe that Jesus is sending the hat man to people. I'm very curious over what exactly he is, because he doesn't have the same modus operandi as the other ones. He's not there to scare people. It's like he's observing. And one thing that is comparable, I'm just drawing a comparison. I can't state this as fact, but the UFO abductees that I've talked to, when they talk about being in the laboratories and on the table and being scared, and with the grays around them doing the experiments, they will often say that as they look around the room, there is some sort of an entity. It's not necessarily a shadow man or a hat man. There's always an entity in the corner of the room, not involved, but observing. There's always someone observing this. And sleep paralysis people have this experience too, where they'll see the certain thing going on right there on their bed or on their chest, but they will sometimes, if they look beyond that there's something observing. And so I don't know why this is. I could only speculate. But it seems to me that all of these entities have different tasks. The alien grays don't do what the shadow people do. The shadow people don't do what the incubus does. You know, they all have their own little place in the hierarchy. They all have a little job to do. And my off the cuff speculation would be, is he some sort of observer? Is he a note taker? Is he gathering algorithms of human behavior and reporting to the higher ups? Hey, we tried this 100 times and 99 of the human beings reacted this way. That's not going to work. It's something like that? One thing I've heard other people talk about is that they think that the shadow man is a harbinger of good or evil. Like he will show up if something really significant in your life is about to happen, and it could be good or bad, which is another reason why people don't. Well. Yeah. And interestingly, the 2 times I saw the shadow or the Hat Man, I was so young that I can't piece my life back together again to know if anything significant happened around the same time. But my 2 experiences with the Hat Man were really bizarre. One night I was having sleep paralysis, and I don't remember when I had sleep paralysis. When I woke up, I didn't open my eyes. I didn't move. I would hold my breath and not move until I fell back asleep. I'm not one of these that got up and ran to my mom and dad's room. I could not move. So I was never one when I had a bad dream to like wake up and sit up in my bed with my eyes wide open and scream to my mom, because I was afraid if I opened my eyes, something might manifest and I might see something. So I was pretty much a coward when I was a kid. I was not going to be drawing attention to myself when I woke up. So one night I had a bad dream. I don't know if it was sleep paralysis or not. And my mom was instantly there in the room. So for many, many years, I thought that must have just been the mother's intuition, like they always know. And maybe I prayed and said, God help me, and he woke my mom up. That was always sort of what I thought. But now I'm wondering if it was even my mom at all. It might have been a familiar, because I asked my mom about this incident many times throughout my life before she died, and she had a different answer every time. Sometimes she remembered, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she saw the Hat Man, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she had no recollection of it at all. So I'm beginning to wonder now in retrospect if that really was even my mom, because I know I didn't cry out for help, and all of a sudden she was there. So I said, can I sleep with you and mom and dad? Can I sleep with you and dad tonight? And she said, no. Do you want to sleep with your brother? I'm like, yeah, because I was terrified. So we get up and we walk into the hall. And again, I always thought this really happened, but maybe it was an out of body. Maybe it was a dream without a dream sort of thing. We get to my brother's room, and he didn't have any shades or curtains. And it was a full moon, and a huge ray of light was lighting up like the middle of his room, like a big stripe. And there was just a Hat Man in a brown pinstripe suit, laying in the moonlight, no face, no hands, the brown bowler hat. It was round, it curved up on the end, it had a piece of fabric. I asked my mom, who's the guy on Jeff's floor? And she looked at it and said, oh, it must be your dad. And my dad traveled a lot, so sometimes he would come home, you know, when I went to bed, he wasn't home, and when I got up, he was home. And it was good enough explanation for a 4-year-old, and my mom didn't seem alarmed. So now the interesting thing about this story is I did wake up the next day in my brother's room. So something led me there. Maybe I was never a sleepwalker, I don't know. But when I asked my mom, what were you talking about? Like saying it was my dad, because my dad wouldn't come home and lay on my brother's floor fully clothed. And she's like, well, I must have just said it to like calm you down. But her responses never made sense. So when you take that story at face value, whether I was awake or it was some sort of dream within a dream, out of body experience, the Hat Man, he served no purpose. He didn't scare me. I was just kind of like, huh? It didn't scare me. I wasn't terrified. It didn't say anything. it's just this bizarre little memory I have in my mind that I'll never forget. So when you ask me what's a shadow man and what's his purpose, I could talk to you for hours. And I could go all the way into ancient Sumerian and Mesopotamian and Babylonian and uh, Epic of Gilgamesh, and I could talk about the Lamashtu entities and the Lamia and the Lilith and the Lailu. I could tell you where these vampiric things come from and what they're doing and why they hang out at the thresholds of your bedroom door. Uh, but I also have done, 15, 20 years of research on the shadow person. The Hat Man is still very perplexing to me because he didn't show up in my life very many times. And I do know, I can't vouch for this guy because I don't know him, but there is a guy named Timothy M. Brown Jr. Have you heard of him?
No, I've not. Timothy M. Brown Jr.?
Yes, he has a website, and again, I can't vouch for him. He's written a book that's not ready yet. The book is called The Hat Man: His Identity Revealed, and his website, I think, is called thehatmanproject.com, and you can sign up on his website, and when his book is available, he sends it out for free. He's done 20 years of research on the Hat Man, and his claim on his website is that he has figured out who this guy is and what he's doing and what he wants. I am waiting with bated breath to get this book. I hope it's not an anticlimactic anticipation. I hope that he has done as much thorough, painstaking research as I had to do for my book and comes up with some solid answers better than just the stupid TikTok and internet stuff that we've got. But
Benadryl. Did you have to take 16 Benadryl to do your research?
I did not. I did not. And let me just tell the listeners there, if you're familiar with the Benadryl TikTok, it was one of these like social media challenges where people were like ODing on Benadryl because they were seeing the Hat Man. Now, why it was the Hat Man is interesting to me. That's the piece that's interesting to me because he's not a real common sleep paralysis guy. He's not as common as the other ones. But
I know what it is. He's an observer, and when kids are on TikTok doing 10, 12 Benadryl, he goes, I got to look at this.
Yeah,
I got to see what the hell's going on here. So he's just doing his thing. He's still observing.
Yeah, if you take it, I will come, right? So anyway, but the fact of the matter is, it could be Benadryl, it could be NyQuil, it could be, Jim Beam. Anytime you are in any sort of altered state of consciousness, they have an opportunity to appear. And I mean, right. It can be ayahuasca, it can be anesthesia in a hospital, it can be over the counter, it can be a massive dopamine rush, it can be hypnotism, it can be in a rage if you're in a blind rage, it can be in an orgasm. Anytime you are out of your mind for 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds or more, they have an opportunity to slip in there. And if they want to, or if they've been invited, or if they have the go ahead. So there's nothing in and of itself magical about Benadryl. But it is interesting to me that what they're seeing most commonly when they do that is the Hat Man as opposed to a Shadow Man or an Alien Gray or an Incubus or something like that.
Yeah, that's true. It seems to be just him. I mean, the substances, I could see an argument for putting you in a state of mind that sort of thins the veil between you and another realm.
Yep.
And to go back to what you were saying earlier about, people thinking that these things are benign or even positive entities simply because they told them something nice or told them, I had a guest who was talking about his experiences, and he was saying that he would, through regressive hypnosis, remember procedures that they were doing on him. And that when he was in a state of panic and fear, they would tell him to calm down, and he would calm down. And so that left him with this impression that they were good guys. And I said, from a operational standpoint, if you have a job to do, let's say you're a veterinarian and you have an animal, and this animal is thrashing and panicking, and well, it's impeding your ability to execute your job. And so it's within your best interest to calm this thing down. And so just because they calm you down does not mean that they're inherently good. I approached a black lab when I was a teenager, and this black lab was infamously a sweetheart, and it bit me in the mouth because I approached it the wrong way. I'm sure the dog was a good dog, but my reading on it was not indicative of whether or not I was in danger.
Yeah.
And so people are, I think it's just that we want this to be okay. And so if you give us any sign that it's okay, we're going to take it.
Yeah.
And only the real critical amongst us, I suppose, can put that to the side and go, no, that doesn't make sense with the data presented. This doesn't line up. I'm not safe. I'm not home, or I didn't invite you here. What are you doing here? You know, there's all kinds of other things going on besides the fact that it's soothing you.
Yeah.
Vicki, this has been a genuine pleasure, and I don't want to keep you for much longer, but I do want to ask you, what do you think? And I know this is loaded. I just said I don't want to keep you for much longer, and so you don't have to go into this, into the depths of it. But what could be the purpose of this? What do they want? What do these things want? What is the end goal? I mean, I have a feeling similar to me. You see this in a biblical context, and so. But for my listeners, what could be the end goal of these things? What are they trying to accomplish? You know, is this just going to happen in perpetuity, or is there a reason and a final step? What is it that they want, and what do they hope to accomplish?
Yeah, absolutely. In a word, if I had to summarize it in one word, it's transformation. And you look, everything that the Lord does, they mimic. They're going to do the opposite. The whole spiel of salvation, dying to the old man and living as the new, resurrection, it's all this becoming a new, bigger, better, new and improved human being, right? Well, they're offering that too.
Transhumanism.
Yes, right. So they have their versions of that. Transhumanism, ascension doctrine, higher vibrational self, all that. What I think specifically in the sleep paralysis scenario is they are actually, we hear all the time about antichrists. They're anti-bridegrooms. They're coming to the door, and this is a whole concept. Revelation 3:20, when it says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock," we talked about that earlier. That we have the wrong picture in our head. It's not Jesus standing outside with a lantern knocking on your front door needing to get in. What that is, right? The Bible was written by Semitic people. It was not written by 21st century Americans who go to Baptist churches. It was written by Semitic people. What they understood that we no longer understand, because all of Scripture is betrothal language. The tabernacle that they set up in the wilderness was set up in the same fashion as a chuppah, which is the wedding tent. And the Torah is written exactly the way that to this day the Jewish people have their prenuptial agreements written up. And I don't mean like an American prenuptial agreement, like who gets stuff in a divorce. It's the agreement between the father and the son-in-law. And so the Torah is a exact representation of a prenuptial agreement between a father and a son-in-law in pertaining how to take care of that bride and what the blessings and the curses are of whether or not you're doing what the father requested. And then the tabernacle was this wedding temple, this wedding tent. And so the wedding tent had a front door, and the groom would go to prepare this place. The groom would carry the bride over the threshold. And then what a lot of people don't know, and this is what Revelation 3:20 is talking about. This is the door Revelation 3:20 is talking about. There was an inner chamber. There was a second room in the tent. And this is why we have a front door to the house, but these shadow people are showing up at the bedroom door. They are at the door of the inner chamber. They are posing as the bridegroom with a capital B. What's happening here? And this is why so many people who have sleep paralysis, not everyone, so many people will say that there are sexual elements to it. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Sometimes it's pleasing, sometimes it's violent. But it's because they're entering into the Tamian chamber. That inner room, that bedroom, was where the nuptials were consummated. So the bride and the groom in Semitic cultures were often engaged for years. And this is where when Jesus says, "I'm going to prepare a place for you," that's also bridal language. The groom would get engaged, and then he'd go off for an undeterminate amount of time, and he would build this home. And then he would come back for her and bring her to the place that he had prepared for her. So once they got there, The bride would then go and sequester herself into the Tamian chamber, and she would shut the door, and the groom is not allowed access to that room until the bride is ready. So she's back there preparing herself and, getting out of her wedding dress and into all the stuff that she's prepared, and putting on her perfume and doing her makeup and doing her hair. And anticipation is growing on both sides of the door. So the groom is on the other side, anxious. So he knocks on the door like Jesus, and she says, I'm not ready yet. So then he's got to wait. He's got to wait a little bit longer, and he'll knock on the door. Are you ready yet? I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. Eventually, he'll knock on the door. And when she opens that door and invites him in, that's her saying, I am now ready. You have permission to come in. He comes into the Tamian chamber, and the wedding is consummated. That's the whole story of Jesus coming back, is the bridegroom coming back saying, I've prepared this place. I'm coming to get my bride. So what these things are doing is they're setting up 1,000-year-long grooming process of getting everyone into a frame of mind where you are the chosen bride. You're the one I've chosen, and I am the bridegroom with a capital B. When I come to you, I'm full of love and light. I fill you with feelings of peace and joy that are so inexpressible in human terms that when you come back from these trips, you compare it to 1,000 orgasms, because it's the only thing you can compare it to when you're in the presence of this light being. They are coming as false bridegrooms, so that when their false Messiah comes back, we will recognize him. That's the one we've been communicating with. That's the one who's been presenting himself. But here's the bad news, people. For those of you who aren't reading your Bibles, planet Earth already had its one and only opportunity to see Jesus Christ as the timid, sweet, sandal-wearing hippie with the man bun, right? He came as a servant. He came as a sacrifice. The second time he comes back, he's coming as a warrior. He's coming on a war horse with a sword strapped to his thigh. And so if you're looking for the love, light, hippie Jesus, that's not the real one. The one that comes back and fills you with love and light, that's not the right one. The one that's coming back is a warrior. And so what they're doing is they're grooming us, and they're even grooming us in our church. Because if you go to the average church now, Jesus is this really nice guy who just wants everyone to be happy, and he just loves everybody exactly the way they are. And that is the Jesus that they are preparing us for. That is the Jesus that's going to come and deceive us. And the real bridegroom is coming, and he'll be everything we wanted and more. But there's going to be a little bit of a battle first. And so what I think that they're doing is they are attempting to transform the entire culture to be prepared for their religion, their coming kingdom, their coming Messiah. And anyone who has done a ton of astral projecting will tell you it is a bit of a re-education process. They come out of that with a whole bunch of theosophical concepts. And if you look at a lot of the people that have transformed our culture and have brought us to the point of religious degradation that we're in right now, a lot of the people that are still held in high regard and are the subjects of our textbooks in schools and colleges that have reformed our culture in the avenues of medicine, science, philosophy, religion, and art. They were card-carrying theosophists who astral projected and got all of the information they wrote down from ascended masters and spirit guides. It's the Helena Blavatskys. It's the Galen, the super surgeon of the 2nd century. It's the H.P. Lovecrafts. It's the Frank Baums who wrote Wizard of Oz. All of these people they are the ones with the best-selling books. They're the ones that people are still flocking to read, and they're the ones that are still being taught in school. They transformed our mind, and they transformed our culture, and they're continuing to do so. And when they come to us and they say, "You've been chosen," they're telling the truth, but they're choosing you to be a missionary. They're choosing you to be a disciple, and you are not being chosen to preach the gospel that is found in the Word of God.
Vicki Joy Anderson, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. This is a tremendous episode, and I just want to thank you for spending some time with me and the audience. This is everything I could have hoped for.
Great.
Before we go, can you remind the audience one more time the name of your book and where people can find you, or your books rather, and where people can find you?
Yep, absolutely. They only come out at night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis, available exclusively at lamarzulli.net. You can find me at my website, vickijoyanderson.com. If you click on the media tab, I have probably over 100 podcasts I've been on, and I try to shake it up each time. Sometimes, depending on questions, I do repeat myself, but I try as best as I can to make every podcast pretty unique so you're not listening to the same stuff every time. You can go to the contact page and email me, and you can find me on Instagram at Vicki Joy Author.
Well, once again, Vicki, thank you so much. This has been a genuine pleasure, and I really hope we could do it again sometime.
Anytime. It has been great.
All right. Well, you take care and have a good night.
You too.